Welcome to the Vine Resources Podcast Show.
Welcome to another edition of the Vine Resources Podcast Show. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Caspar Craven. Caspar, thank you so much for coming in.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, David.
Caspar, I was really excited when you said you'd come in and meet me and do this podcast. I've obviously known you in other ways through our time both at the Sub Club.
For quite a few years now, so it goes back a long way, right?
Yeah,
so
maybe 10 years.
Probably about that, actually, yeah.
But of course, there's an amazing story that you've got. And before we jump into some of the leadership questions, I wonder if we can obviously talk about something that's obviously very close to your heart over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years actually, about the book and the journey that you've been on with your family. Can you give just our listeners a quick brief introduction about what that is and what you've been doing?
Of course. So let me take you back on a story. So 2009, I was running my business, Travis, which you remember, here in London. And back then, we had sales of about 400 grand, losing money, and working that 16, 18 hours a day. And as a consequence of that, barely saw my wife, felt guilty about not spending time with the kids, and everything sort of feeling under pressure, arguments about this, that, and everything else, which I'm sure some other people will be able to relate to. And we sort of had an idea to go and do something completely different. And it was my wife who suggested that we go and sail around the world and again create magical, life-changing experiences for us and our kids. And it was completely crazy back then because we didn't have the money, not even remotely close, because it cost a lot of money to go and get a boat and sail around the world. Nicola, my wife, she'd only sailed twice. She'd been seasick both times. We didn't have a boat, so lots of good reasons why we shouldn't go and do it. But we said we're going to create a 5-year plan to go and make this happen, put a date in the diary, and so over 5 years literally changed everything in our lives, and then went off and sailed around the world for 2 years with the 5 of us, and just had the most amazing experiences. Actually sailed 1.5 times around the world. Wow! But in a 2-year period. And
what was that moment? And again, I read a few things in the book myself. I listened to the audio. What was those moments where you thought, actually, this could actually happen? How did that come about? Because that's never easy for people who are listening. Perhaps even growing a business, starting a business, or an adventure. Yeah. What was it for you?
So it was the catalyst was asking ourselves the question: is this all there is to life? So I remember, leaving college and sort of being in my early 20s. You know that thing where you bounce out of bed with energy and enthusiasm in the morning. And by the time we got to our sort of mid to late 30s, just feeling a bit ground down. It's just like, it probably looked okay from the outside. Sort of living in sort of, nice part of England, 2 kids, having your own business. But inside, it was just like, we want more than this. And we're asking ourselves what's really important to us in life. So that was kind of the catalyst to really think deeply about that question. And we spent 6 months working together, my wife and I, to create a story, a narrative of how we wanted our life to be different. And that was the starting point, really thinking about that question, carving out the time to say, what does a different life look like for us?
How did you juggle that, making all that happen with the daily do, which is probably already 100% full?
It was 100%. So look, here's the first thing. So the first thing was getting crystal clear on what we wanted to do and why it was important. Because there were so many how-to questions. How do we get the money? How do we get safe? How do we get a boat? How do we homeschool? How do we get safe medically? All those things. If we'd focused on all those questions to start with, we would never have done it. We would have just been overwhelmed by those questions. So the first 6 months was getting really, really clear on what we wanted to do. And then the 4.5 years after that, it was a period of learning and growth in so many different ways. I almost broke the business. I got to the point where I was driving the business so hard that my business partner turned around to me and said, you carry on what you're doing, everybody's going to leave, including me. So I then had to go back to ground zero and learn how to be a leader again, how to really build a team. So it was all forced by having that date in the diary when we said we're going to go and do these things and have a different type of life. So that was the driving thing behind it.
When you were, on your adventures, and probably way before that, you obviously probably set some mission and shared values even for your family.
Absolutely.
How did you go about doing that, and how how can other people who might be listening to this develop those in their own business, for example?
Yeah, no, absolutely. What's really interesting is that since we've been back, so we've been back for just over a year and a half now, Nicola, my wife and I, we sat down and we looked at the two things we've been most successful at. One was building up and eventually selling the business that I had before, which we can come on to that. And the other thing was going on our family adventure. And we overlaid what were the things that made us successful in thrive in both areas. And there was a set of principles that we came up with. And actually there were things that I learnt first of all in the business world. So it's things about having a really clear vision. Where are we going? Knowing why it's important, the mission, knowing what are our shared values, how do we behave, how do we act together. And what's fascinating is that this applies equally well in a family as it does in a business. So if you're listening to this and thinking, how do I transform my business? How do I grow my business? Same principles that you use in a family. And as an example, I was in Boston last week with KPMG, and they were talking about culture and values. And what was really interesting is they were saying the fundamental thing is working out what's your personal purpose, why are you here? Because if you get really clear on your personal mission, and then you link that to the company mission, then you get a much stronger connection. And I think we're seeing the rise these days of the purpose-driven organisations, where everyone is engaging with a company and saying, you know what, there's a mission that I really buy into. I always love the Steve Jobs story, where he said that when he recruited the CEO from Pepsi, it's like, do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come and change the world with me? And it's that sort of thing. It's creating an exciting mission. And I guess, we created an exciting mission for us as a family, and I almost broke the business, and then I realised we had to create an exciting mission for the business. So we worked together as a team in the business and said, the mission we came up with was we said we want to become the world's best data treasure hunters. So we did data analytics. So we created something that everybody could feel proud of and say, you know what, that's the direction over there that we want to go in. So it's getting really clear on your purpose in personal life and in business life, because you're the same person, right? And it's just creating that connection between the two things.
Who have you perhaps looked up to as a leader, and how has that impacted what you've been doing over the last 5-10 years?
So I read a lot about different people and the businesses that they've grown. So I love what Elon Musk is doing, driven by a really clear purpose of making a difference to the world. I love the stuff that Richard Branson does. He injects a lot of fun and playfulness into the workplace. I find a lot of Tony Robbins stuff. I think he has some great ideas which he packages really well and makes it consumable for a lot of people. But I'm continually sort of reading books and taking things from different people that I meet. So this morning we're off to go and meet Sir Tim Schmidt, who founded the Eden Project, and he has some brilliant ideas around encouraging diversity in the workplace and getting different ideas coming through. So always looking for different people. You can take something from everyone, right? If
you take the challenges you had in growing the business and exiting, what are the things, perhaps the mistakes that you made that you recognise now looking back, that if other people were growing a business you would give them this advice? What would it be?
Okay, so the fundamental shift that I had to make after everybody threatened to leave the business, I realised that I had to do something very differently. And I went and got a coach. Her name's Margaret. Absolutely incredible. She was the person who really turned things around for me. And she gave me this quote. It's an African proverb which you may have heard before, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So the whole essence of that was around building an amazing team of people, taking your ego out of it. And the vision that I carry and encourage any business to do these days is to create the business that can run without you. Because that's the challenge that I had to do, because I had to create a business that could run without me, because I was going to be on a boat in the middle of the ocean, so there wasn't much that I could do. So that meant my ego literally had to leave the business and just create an amazing team of people and find people who are way better than I was. And the fundamental building blocks of creating a business that can run without you is having a really clear vision, where are we going, a really clear purpose, why are we doing this, how do we behave, how do we act, have amazing people, build on their strengths and getting people doing the things that they really love doing. But the guiding principle and the thing that I would encourage people to hold in their minds is how can you create the business that runs without you? So just creating that structure so that you become redundant.
When you had perhaps difficult challenges and difficult times in your sailing adventure, especially with your children, can you share a story about, perhaps one of those difficult moments, and how you woke up the next morning and pulled everyone together and focused on the drive? I'd love to hear, because I'm sure there was many challenges.
We had a few. And it's interesting. The things that we did to transform the businesses and the skills that we developed around that, around values, around being resourceful, were exactly the same skills that we needed to handle challenges when we were at sea. So one of the stories that I share is that we were in the deep in the South Pacific Ocean, 500 miles from the nearest bit of land, and we had complete power failure on the boat. Now, what does power failure on a boat mean? Let me give you a context. Remember the film Apollo 13? And you have the 3 astronauts up in the space shuttle up in space, and they had power failure. It was a little bit like that, apart from the fact that they had 3 astronauts, another 50 rocket scientists back at Cape Canaveral, and you have to sit there and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to deal with that. So, when everything goes wrong, we had huge seas and waves breaking over the boat, really strong winds, and we had to figure out how do we deal with this. And the way that we dealt with it went right back to our values. So I remember back in my corporate days thinking that values are soft, fluffy things. They're nothing of the sort. Values are the things that define your behaviours. Behaviours are what drives your actions. Actions are what drives your outcomes. And what we did with our values is we talked about them. We agreed what the set of values were. We talked about what is it that we do when we live these values at their very best. So we got concrete examples. And then we created a conversation around it every day. So we would hold values prizes over breakfast, and we would talk about what people were doing well and celebrating those good things. So were things like love, laugh, action, going prepared. So we were creating behaviours where those values became the instinctive things. So back in the situation in the boat in the middle of nowhere, what do? Do we turn around and blame each other, or do we just live our values? So we found the humour in the situation. So we tell the kids that we didn't have a working toilet. We sort of introduced them to the buckets. They were lining up on deck to get a toilet in the bucket and chuck it over the side. We found the humour in the situation. And then for the next 4 days, we just literally worked as a team, lived our values. And I would say we didn't survive, we thrived. It became one of our proudest moments working together as a team. But because we'd ingrained those values, they weren't just for the easy times, they were for the tough times. So, we hand steered the boat for the next 4 days, and Nicola and I, we would steer for half an hour at a time each. Kids would be downstairs, they'd bring us up cold beans and water up on deck and things like that. And we worked together as a team to solve that problem. Whereas I think if I'd been back in my old corporate world, someone would have said, it's your fault, why haven't you done this, and turned to blame. But the fundamental thing was the values and embedding that.
How did you, some people, again, may be listening to this, they might have children, they're thinking, how am I going to bring these children out of school? How am I going to teach them? I know you weren't a teacher, and stuff that you learned, so what advice would you give someone who's listening to that and thinking, or perhaps they have a partner who doesn't have the same thought process as actually making it happen yourself? What advice would you give them?
Okay. So the first thing is, I suspect that some of your listeners, the thought that might be going through their head is this guy completely and utterly irresponsible to take a 2-year-old on a boat around the world? And I understand that question. So the answer to that is that 5 years we had 5 years preparing to do this. And we have this standing joke in our family that if it was down to me, nothing would ever get finished. If it was down to my wife, nothing would ever get started. So she is the detailed planner in our world. So for the final 3 years before we went, whenever you saw her, she had this file underneath her arm with these countless spreadsheets going through every single scenario you could imagine and putting in place all the training you need to do that. So we trained to become ship's doctors, and we went through the whole education thing. We spoke to the schools, and we got the whole education program sorted out. So it's literally thinking through every different scenario. So if anyone is thinking about, what do I want to do, then the thing is sort of talking with your partner, getting really clear on what excites both of you, because this has to be a shared story. It can't be something that one person wants and the other person doesn't want. And so it's just finding what you share in common, creating a story around that, and then I would say put a date in the diary when you want to make stuff happen by, but then you have to get down to that really detailed level of planning, and you won't be able to answer all the questions in one go, and we had to chunk it down to go and do it. So lots of planning and lots of attention to detail to make sure that it does happen. So.
Now, if you were starting again,
Yep.
and you may well be doing other things, I'm sure, but if you were starting again and taking this experience you had both from the business, from Trovus, but also obviously your adventures, what's the one thing you would say to yourself if you were starting it again and starting that business tomorrow? What would you do?
So surround myself by amazing people, find what each person loves doing, find their purpose. I always talk about find that thing that sets your soul on fire, right? And get people doing that thing that they love. And actually, I've got an analogy for that. So we're sitting here with Columbus, my son, and so I'll tell that story about education, which links back to this. So when we were homeschooling on the boat for the first 3 months, I remember sitting down trying to teach Columbus about the Tudors and the kings and queens of England. And I remember coming down to the saloon table, and after about an hour, there was still a blank sheet of paper, and the pen hadn't moved across the page. And it's like, okay, we need a different approach. Mm-hmm. So put the books to one side and said, Columbus, what are you interested in? And he said, I'm really interested in fishing. So we got the fishing books out, and so within days Columbus would know all about the different fish. We then started catching fish. He's now writing up his journal. He's drawing beautiful pictures. We're measuring the fish, we're weighing the fish, we're dissecting them. He sets up a business making and selling fishing lures. So his learning rate just literally went through the roof because he was engaged with doing it. Mm-hmm. Same principle in business. For every person in your team, what's the thing that really switches them on and gets them inspired and they love doing? That will leave gaps in the business. Mm-hmm. That's fine. You then recruit and fill for those gaps. But it's just unlocking what really gets everybody flying along. So that thing there.
Well, I'd love just to know just a interesting basic detail on the day-to-day on the boat. I saw one of your pictures in the book about your shopping trip, for example. Yeah. Now, I remember when I was backpacking around the world, I had to shop with 10 other people on a backpackers thing. It was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. We got way too much, and it was crazy. How do you even manage that? Because I've seen like hundreds of supermarket bags in the boat. Tell us about that.
Lots of planning. Lots of planning. So. So I actually sailed around the world in 2000 in what was called the world's toughest yacht race, the BT Global Challenge. And back then I was in charge of food for the whole boat. So I had to get food for 18 people for 40 days. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of spreadsheets, working out different meal plans. So you work out a 7-day meal plan, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. So same principle that we would be at sea this time for 3 weeks at a time. We'd come up with the list of all the different things that we wanted. So I remember before we went going to the supermarket and going buying 40 kilos of pasta, 40 kilos of rice, and slabs and tins of baked beans and different sauces and things like that. But you've got to have interesting food that everybody wants to eat, because once you've been at sea for 2 weeks and suddenly everybody's like getting on each other's nerves for whatever reason, then it's really good to have nice food that everybody wants. Yeah. And we did a lot of baking on board, so every day we baked fresh breads, and we caught lots of fish, so we had lots of fresh sushi and sashimi and stuff like that. So it's
fantastic. Yeah. And I read in the book, and I think about this quite a lot. When you go on any world adventure, coming back to Earth, coming back to a bit of reality, the sort of the day to day. How do you keep that motivation and inspiration and that little fire in your belly and your and your children? When perhaps you're not doing the most amazing things. I'm curious to hear that.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So look, when I sailed around the world first time, we had this amazing experience, and I remember coming back after that, and 3 months afterwards, finding myself sitting in my dad's garden at 3 o'clock in the morning with a bottle of whiskey. Because you have an incredible high, where do you go after that? You crash down, which is exactly the question, right? So right from the start with our planning, we had a section, you'll see it in the book in our vision statement, saying what does this go on to lead to afterwards? Because we knew this wasn't just a one-time only adventure. This was fundamentally changing how we lived our lives. So we had in there saying this is going to lead on to new exciting adventures. We didn't know what they were back then, but we created the space for it. So since we've come back, we now split our time between London and San Francisco. I'm on a plane most weeks speaking to audiences around the world about leadership and teamwork. And we still go off to have adventures. So last summer we sailed from San Francisco to Canada and back. It's about 2,000 miles. This summer I'm heading off in about 4 weeks to sail from San Francisco down to Mexico and back. So there are still adventures happening the whole time, and we still have an alternative approach to education. So the kids are in mainstream school, but so Columbus is with me today. We're off to go meet Sir Tim Smith this morning, and it's just mixing things up and doing things differently to how we did it before. So I think otherwise I'd fall into that pit where I was before. So.
Finally, if someone's listening to this, particularly maybe they're growing a technology business, you did amazing to exit because many companies don't ever manage to make an exit of a business. Again, what advice would you give someone listening to this to help them on that journey?
So it comes back to building an incredible team of people who can grow the business. There's also that thing about starting with the end in mind. So, we sold our business actually whilst I was in the middle of the Pacific, so a seven-figure sum. And the only reason we were able to do that is that, we put this team of people in place and got them running the business. Before we left, we tried to sell the business before we left the UK. Nobody was interested at that stage. We ended up getting 2 offers as we sailed across the Atlantic, and then we actually closed it as we sailed across the Pacific. But the fundamental thing is, brilliant team of people on a clear mission, clear purpose. Brilliant. And that was what made us attractive to a buyer. So.
Fantastic. Now let's mention the book, because if anyone's interested in finding out and reading more about it, Where the Magic Happens.
Yep.
I know it's definitely on Amazon.
Yes, it is.
It's definitely an Audible store. Is it anywhere else?
Yes, it's in bookstores as well, but probably the easiest place for most people to go and get it these days is on Amazon.
And where's the next book signing? Where can they find you? And look, if people are interested in reaching out to you, how's the best way to get in touch with you?
So my website, CasparCraven.com, and I'm on all the social channels, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those sorts of things. Yeah. And all the details of the book are on my website, CasparCraven.com. So it's
brilliant. Well, look, good luck with the next adventures for yourself, and I look forward to following it. And thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you very much. Great questions. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, David.
Okay.